Hello internet friends. This video is going to conclude my three-part series looking at seminal documents in the history of medical ethics. So first we looked at the famous Nuremberg Code, and then second the the Declaration of Geneva, which was an attempt by the World Medical Association to police itself. You'll remember the Geneva Code had to do with the law, and so the World Medical Association is the doctors themselves. And that document did not address medical experimentation, which was the main crux of the Geneva Code, of the Nuremberg Code, following the Nuremberg trials after World War II. So, in 1964, almost 20 years later, the World Medical Association got together at a assembly and finally passed a declaration in reference specifically to medical experimentation and how that was going to be ethically carried out. And that's what we're going to look at today, okay? So the current document is a bit longer than the 1964 original. It's probably illustrative to go and look at the changes that were made. But I'm just going to look at it as it stands today in the time of the coronavirus. We'll see what physicians are expected to, adhere to in terms of their professional standards. Once again, we're at the World Medical Association website, and we're looking at the current World Medical Association Declaration of Helsinki, covering ethical principles for medical research involving human subjects. And it is a bit longer than the other two videos, but it still should be able to get through it pretty quickly. Adopted by the 18th World Medical Association General Assembly at Helsinki, Finland in June of 1964, and amended by these subsequent assemblies, most recently in Fortaleza, Brazil, in October of 2013. Alrighty, Preamble. The World Medical Association has developed the Declaration of Helsinki as a statement of ethical principles for medical research involving human subjects, including research on identifiable human material and data. Identifiable is a big point. The Declaration is intended to be read as a whole, and each of its constituent paragraphs should be applied with consideration of all other relevant paragraphs. Consistent with the mandate of the WMA, the Declaration is addressed primarily to physicians. The WMA encourages others who are involved in medical research involving human subjects to adopt these principles. General principles. The Declaration of Geneva of the WMA binds the physician with the words, "The health of the patient will be my first consideration," and the International Code of Medical Ethics declares that a physician shall act in the patient's best interest when providing medical care. So don't you feel good for having watched my previous video where we covered those two documents. It is the duty of the physician to promote and safeguard the health, well-being, and rights of patients, including those who are involved in medical research. The physician's knowledge and conscience are dedicated to the fulfillment of this duty. Medical progress is based on research that ultimately must include studies involving human subjects. Is that true? Anyway, the primary purpose of medical research involving human subjects is to understand the causes, development, and effects of diseases and improve preventive, diagnostic, and therapeutic conditions, methods, procedures, and treatments. Even the best proven interventions must be evaluated continually through research for their safety, effectiveness, efficiency, accessibility, and quality. Medical research is subject to ethical standards that promote and ensure respect for all human subjects and protect their health and rights. While the primary purpose of medical research is to generate new knowledge, this goal can never take precedence over the rights and interests of individual research subjects. It is the duty of physicians who are involved in medical research to protect the life, health, dignity, integrity, right to self-determination, privacy and confidentiality of personal information of research subjects. The responsibility for the protection of research subjects must always rest with the physician or other healthcare professionals and never with the research subjects, even though they have given consent. Let's read that one more time. The responsibility for the protection of research subjects must always rest with the physician or other healthcare professionals and never with the research subjects, even though they have given consent. Physicians must consider the ethical, legal, and regulatory norms and standards for research involving human subjects in their own countries, as well as applicable international norms and standards. No national or international ethical, legal, or regulatory requirement should reduce or eliminate any of the protections for research subjects set forth in this declaration. Medical research should be conducted in a manner that minimizes possible harm to the environment. Medical research involving human subjects must be conducted only by individuals with the appropriate ethics and scientific education, training, and qualifications. Research on patients or healthy volunteers requires the supervision of a competent and appropriately qualified physician or other healthcare professional. Groups that are underrepresented in medical research should be provided appropriate access to participation in research. Yes, so as I said, it's been amended, and here we're introducing affirmative action for good or ill. Physicians who combine medical research with medical care should involve their patients in research only to the extent that this is justified by its potential preventive, diagnostic, or therapeutic value, and if the physician has good reason to believe that participation in the research study will not adversely affect the health of the patients who serve as research subjects. I just can't help but think of the old saw. That's why they call it practicing medicine, right? Sorry. Appropriate compensation and treatment for subjects who are harmed as a result of participating in research must be ensured. Next section, risks, burdens, and benefits. In medical practice and in medical research, most interventions involve risks and burdens. Medical research involving human subjects may only be conducted if the importance of the objective outweighs the risks and burdens to the research subjects. All medical research involving human subjects must be preceded by careful assessment of predictable risks and burdens to the individuals and groups involved in the research in comparison with foreseeable benefits to them and to other individuals or groups affected by the condition under investigation. Measures to minimize the risks must be implemented. The risks must be continuously monitored, assessed, and documented by the researcher. Physicians may not be involved in a research study involving human subjects unless they are confident that the risks have been adequately assessed and can be satisfactorily managed. When the risks are found to outweigh the potential benefits, or when there is conclusive proof of definitive outcomes, physicians must assess whether to continue, modify, or immediately stop the study. So that calls to mind the two conditions for ending a study under or medical treatment under the Declaration of Geneva, if you remember those, which is if the patient or the subject feels that they are unable to continue, or if the physician feels they're unable to continue. No, that was that was the Nuremberg Code that I'm thinking of. It was points 9 and 10 of the Nuremberg Code this is relating to. Alrighty, vulnerable groups and individuals. Some groups and individuals are particularly vulnerable and may have an increased likelihood of being wronged or incurring additional harm. All vulnerable groups and individuals should receive specifically considered protection. Medical research with a vulnerable group is only justified if the research is responsive to the health needs or priorities of this group, and the research cannot be carried out in a non-vulnerable group. In addition, this group should stand to benefit from the knowledge, practices, or interventions that result from the research. Next section, scientific research requirements and research protocols. Medical research involving human subjects must conform to generally accepted scientific principles, be based on a thorough knowledge of the scientific literature, other relevant sources of information, and adequate laboratory and, as appropriate, animal experimentation. The welfare of animals used for research must be respected. The design and performance of each research study involving human subjects must be clearly described and justified in a research protocol. The protocol should contain a statement of the ethical considerations involved and should indicate how the principles in this declaration have been addressed. The protocol should include information regarding funding, sponsors, institutional affiliations, potential conflicts of interest, incentives for subjects, and information regarding provisions for treating and/or compensating subjects who are harmed as a consequence of participation in the research study. In clinical trials, the protocol must also describe appropriate arrangements for post-trial provisions. Research ethics committees. The research protocol must be submitted for consideration, comment, guidance, and approval to the concerned research ethics committee before the study begins. This committee must be transparent in its functioning, must be independent of the researcher, the sponsor, and any other undue influence, and must be duly qualified. It must take into consideration the laws and regulations of the country or countries in which this research is to be performed, as well as applicable international norms and standards, but these must not be allowed to reduce or eliminate any of the protections for research subjects set forth in this declaration. The committee must have the right to monitor ongoing studies. The researcher must provide monitoring information to the committee, especially information about any serious adverse events. No amendment to the protocol may be made without consideration and approval by the committee. After the end of the study, the researchers must submit a final report to the committee containing a summary of the study's findings and conclusions. So obviously this section was added later because the whole point, this is basically undermining the whole point of the declaration, which is to provide ethical guidelines. And now we're taking it out of the, out of the hands of the declaration, and we're putting it into the hands of a committee, which must be in charge of monitoring the research, right? So, starting to contradict ourselves, getting a little clown world here. Privacy and confidentiality. Every precaution must be taken to protect the privacy of research subjects and the confidentiality of their personal information. All right, just a little bit more, guys. Informed consent, this is going to be a big one. This is one of the big reasons that the Nuremberg Code was written in the first place. Participation by individuals capable of giving informed consent as subjects in medical research must be voluntary. Although it may be appropriate to consult family members or community leaders, no individual capable of giving informed consent may be enrolled in a research study unless he or she freely agrees. In medical research involving human subjects capable of giving informed consent, each potential subject must be adequately informed of the aims, methods, sources of funding, any possible conflicts of interest, institutional affiliations of the researcher, the anticipated benefits and potential risks of the study, and the discomfort it may entail, post-study provisions, and any other relevant aspects of the study. The potential subject must be informed of the right to refuse to participate in the study or to withdraw consent or participate at any time without reprisal. Special attention should be given to the specific information needs of individual potential subjects as well as to the methods used to deliver the information. After ensuring that the potential subject has understood the information, the physician or another appropriately qualified individual must then seek the potential subject's freely given informed consent, preferably in writing. If the consent cannot be expressed in writing, the non-written consent must be formally documented and witnessed. All medical research subjects should be given the option of being informed about the general outcome and results of the study. When seeking informed consent for participation in a research study, the physician must be particularly cautious if the potential subject is in a dependent relationship with the physician or may consent under duress. In such situations, the informed consent must be sought by an appropriately qualified individual who is completely independent of this relationship. Seems like that you're already violating one of the other sections of the Geneva Declaration. But anyway, for a potential research subject who is incapable of giving informed consent, the physician must seek informed consent from the legally authorized representative. These individuals must not be included in a research study that has no likelihood of benefit for them unless it is intended to promote the health of the group represented by the potential subject. The research cannot instead be performed with persons capable of providing informed consent, and the research entails only minimal risk and minimal burden. When a potential research subject who is deemed incapable of giving informed consent is able to give assent to decisions about participation in research, the physician must seek that assent in addition to the consent of the legally authorized representative. The potential subject's dissent should be respected. So if you start a experiment not being able to give consent, and you somehow regain the ability to give consent during the course of the experiment, they must now ask you for consent instead of your legally authorized representative, whoever has power of attorney over you. Research involving subjects who are physically or mentally incapable of giving consent, for example, unconscious patients, may be done only if the physical or mental condition that prevents giving informed consent is a necessary characteristic of the research group. In such circumstances, the physician must seek informed consent from the legally authorized representative. If no such representative is available and if the research cannot be delayed, the study may proceed without informed consent, provided that the specific reasons for involving subjects with a condition that renders them unable to give informed consent have been stated in the research protocol and the study has been approved by a research ethics committee. Consent to remain in the research must be obtained as soon as possible from the subject or a legally authorized representative. The physician must fully inform the patient which aspects of their care are related to the research. The refusal of a patient to participate in a study or the patient's decision to withdraw from the study must never adversely affect the patient-physician relationship. For medical research using identifiable human material or data, such as research on material or data contained in biobanks or similar repositories, physicians must seek informed consent for its collection, storage, and/or reuse. There may be acceptable situations where consent would be impossible or impracticable to obtain for such research. In such situations, the research may be done only after consideration and approval of a research ethics committee. Use of placebo. The benefits, risks, burdens, and effectiveness of a new intervention must be tested against those of the best proven interventions, except in the following circumstances. Where no proven intervention exists, the use of a placebo or no intervention is acceptable, or where for compelling and scientifically sound methodological reasons the use of any intervention less effective than the best proven one, the use of placebo or no intervention is necessary to determine the efficacy or safety of an intervention. And the patients who receive any intervention less effective than the best proven one, placebo or no intervention, will not be subject to additional risks or serious or irreversible harm as a result of not receiving the best proven intervention. Extreme care must be taken to avoid abuse of this option, indeed. So this is something that we are alleging is being done in the case of vaccine research, for example, where instead of using a placebo, they're using, I guess they would say, a intervention less effective than the best proven one, which means they're not injecting the person with a placebo. The control group does not receive a placebo. It receives the thimerosal and the other adjuvants that would be in the full vaccine. And so that's how they're testing the efficacy of the vaccine instead of using a placebo. Anyway, a lot to dig into here. Post-trial provisions. In advance of a clinical trial, sponsors, researchers, and host country governments should make provisions for post-trial access for all participants who still need an intervention identified as beneficial in the trial. This information must be disclosed to participants during the informed consent process. Research registration and publication and dissemination of results. Every research study involving human subjects must be registered in a publicly accessible database before recruitment of the first subject. Researchers, authors, sponsors, editors, and publishers all have ethical obligations with regard to the publication and dissemination of the results of research. Researchers have a duty to make publicly available the results of their research on human subjects and are accountable for the completeness and accuracy of their reports. All parties should adhere to accepted guidelines for ethical reporting. Negative and inconclusive, as well as positive results, must be published or otherwise made publicly available. Sources of funding, institutional affiliations, and conflicts of interest must be declared in the publication. Reports of research not in accordance with the principles of this declaration should not be accepted for publication. So publicly available makes me wonder why all of these studies I'm looking up are behind paywalls. But anyway, the final section, unproven interventions in clinical practice. In the treatment of an individual patient where proven interventions do not exist or other known interventions have been ineffective, the physician, after seeking expert advice with informed consent from the patient or a legally authorized representative, may use an unproven intervention if, in the physician's judgment, it offers hope of saving life, reestablishing health, or alleviating suffering. This intervention should subsequently be made the object of research designed to evaluate its safety and efficacy. In all cases, new information must be recorded and, where appropriate, made publicly available. So this is, of course, highly applicable to the current situation with use of horse dewormers versus the use of mRNA devices, etc., etc. And there you have it. You, along with myself, have now read through the full Declaration of Helsinki. And I probably should have started with a historical draft of that and worked upward to the current one, which has a lot of goofy stuff written into it. But that illustrates, the fact that experimental research these days, experimental medicine, is kind of where the stickiness of the problem lies. You can hear in there's a lot of weird stuff that's been added, especially committees. But anyway, those are the three big documents: the Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Geneva, and the Declaration of Helsinki, that have informed our modern medical ethics landscape. So again, they're not legally binding. The second two are associated with professional associations, so best they're probably going to be able to do is censure their members. They might have to do with any kind of a legal case that might be brought up against said members. There's certainly something that people are going to consider when making the assessment of whether or not a particular physician's practice was ethical or unethical. But anyway, lots of interesting questions there. And of course, I think you can see that some of those aren't being followed by a lot of what we see today, just as lay persons observing the vaunted halls of medicine. But thanks for getting through all that with me. Now you have a little bit of knowledge about the main documents that medical ethics are based on internationally. So this has been Evan Benton of Dogg for Mayor. Give a little like down there. Leave a comment if you found anything interesting or if you have any further questions. Share this video with your friends and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you can support my work at all, I would really appreciate it. Otherwise, thanks very much for watching and have a good night.